in the regular gigging world for bass players, and I don't know, like people don't critique your playing, really, right? Like they just go,
Not
sound
to your
great.
face.
They either call you back or they don't, right?
They'll
It,
talk shit behind your back. Yeah,
right. So you
yeah,
never, so when you don't get called back, you don't know why.
right.
There's really a lot of mysteries I found, around that aspect of being a professional.
What's up, folks? Welcome to episode 128 of the Bass Shed podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. What's up, folks? What's up, folks? How you doing? If this is your first time checking out the show, please make sure to hit subscribe wherever you are listening to the podcast. And also, I'm bringing up a topic that I want to hear your thoughts on. The topic is the 5-string P bass. Maybe a little controversial. Maybe a little controversial of a topic, right? We all know it doesn't have the goodness of a 58 P bass. I get it. It's kind of not even really a P bass. Like, it's a P bass, but it's not a real P bass. All that being said, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about pulling the trigger. I'm a 5-string player, and I'm thinking about getting a 5-string P. I played some, haven't found one I totally am in love with yet. But let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts about the 5-string P bass. For the listeners that checked out episode 127 of the Bass Shed podcast, I talked about that it was me and Jerry Jamont were going to be doing another masterclass in San Pedro. We did that on August 24th. That was a great event. Jerry brought his bass. Jerry did some playing. We had some people chime in internationally. That was great. Thank you to everybody who was there. I led a trio that played later that night with Dr. Dan Cole on guitar and the great Joel Taylor on drums. That was a lot of fun. We played a lot of odd meter stuff. I think that's the only band I play in where there's more than one tune in 15/8. Dan loves playing in 15. So I think there was two or three tunes in 15. Like after 2 or 3 tunes in 15, it's like enough already. Dan, if you're checking this out, love you, buddy. But we got to do something different, right? We got the 15. We got the tunes in 15. That's fine. We have more than enough. More than anybody ever needs to hear. One of them is Dan's arrangement of "Everybody Wants to Rule the World" in 15, which is super cool. Especially because there's the triplet guitar figure that doesn't add up right. Definitely in 15. So really fun band. That was taped, and that footage will be live shortly at the Bass Shed Academy. Coming up in the masterclass program, in the masterclass series, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I guess I should figure out what I'm going to call it. But Mr. Oscar Catoya is going to be doing a Latin bass masterclass on, October 26th. It's a live stream event, and that is also in person. All information is at thebassshedacademy.org. So if you're interested in improving your Latin bass playing, I know I am. Like, I'm not a strong Latin player. It's not my thing. I remember doing a hang with Oscar around the time that he did the podcast episode. He was on episode 84 of the Bass Shed podcast. Stop by, check that out. A little shameless plug. But around that time, we were down at Lemur Music, and I think he had his baby bass with him. It was an electric upright. I remember that. And he was just showing me the technique about how you get that sound, like that specific sound. It wasn't the baby bass that was all Oscar. It was the technique. He was showing me what he did with his right hand to get that to happen. Super killing. And he can also generate it on the electric too. So it's not just the instrument. That sound is in his hands. So if you're interested in improving your Latin bass playing, check out the masterclass with Oscar Catoya on October 26th. LemurMusic.com. Everything you need for the double bass can be found at LemurMusic.com. Basses, bows, rosin, accessories, amps. Now they're doing electrics, right? They got a full range of Fender basses at Lemur Music. Stop by LemurMusic.com. Use the promo code TheBassShed, all one word, for 10% off. LemurMusic.com.
Hi, this is Jerry Jamont. I want to tell you about my upcoming book of bass transcriptions, JJ's Jukebox Volume 1. This is a collection of over 15 of my bass lines in standard notation and tablature. They are accurately done here by Ryan Roberts of the Bass Shed Academy. Each transcription is accompanied by a video where I talk about what was happening during the recording session, how I got involved, and how I approach each song. Stop by the bassshedacademy.org to learn more about my book of transcriptions, JJ's Jukebox Volume 1, and purchase a signed copy of my memoirs, Make It Happen.
All right, on the episode is Frank Canino. I originally met Frank Canino at one of the Jerry Jamont masterclasses we did, the one up in North Hollywood at the Amp Shop. Frank came. Everybody who came, like, we're all just hanging out at the end, chatting for a little while. So I met Frank there. Then Frank hit me up. We just kind of started talking. He came on the podcast. And now, if you know the name Frank Canino, you know the amount of legends Frank has played with. If you don't, you're about to find out. Frank has played with legends, the legends. I got a list here because I want to make sure I don't leave anybody out. But Frank has played with Joe Cocker, Ray Charles, Gladys Knight, Rick Springfield, Benny King, Dr. John, the Blues Brothers. The list keeps going on. Right? He's played with all of them. If you've ever played a cover gig, if you've ever played a cover gig in your life, which I'm assuming most of us have, we've played all these. We've played all these artists, right? We played all this stuff. He's the guy who plays with the actual artists. Frank Canino, bad dude. He spent some time out in New York. He's recently moved out here to Los Angeles. We talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about the difference between the New York scene and the LA scene. What's common, what's different. We covered a lot of topics. It was great to have Frank on the show. And definitely stop by his website. I will have links to it in the show notes. And here it is. Here's my talk with Frank Canino.
So here we are. Are we on the
Here
air?
we are, man. How you doing?
Oh, very well, very well. Just you know, doing my practicing a little this morning and getting ready for this. No weird events today. Just you know, just getting ready to talk. About what we talked about the other day. So how do we
Yeah.
start? What's the first question?
I know we could technically be started. Let's just go. Let's start with this. You're practicing. What are you practicing?
Oh, well, in last July, I started taking serious classical lessons with someone recommended to me that I knew a few people, successful bassists that studied with this lady. And it's great. It was mostly because I wanted to see partially because I wanted to see how, what I would say the other half lives. Like I remember in college,
Right.
where I went to SUNY Purchase in New York, which
Okay.
has since developed a really extensive jazz program. When I started there, I was a freshman in the fall of '73. They had no jazz department at all. And I saw all these bass players running around, playing classical music. A few of them would play bass, and a couple of them I still know who they are. And it just seemed very alien to me, at just the method and the way that they, their focus, and but they were very good. They had things going on, this stuff,
Right.
and over the years, you see some jazz bass players that obviously have had classical training because they look beautiful going up and down the neck, and
Sure.
some don't look as beautiful, but I wanted to look beautiful too. So I've just been learning that music and that approach, and it's been great. It's also very easy. Some of it is very easy, like, with certain forms of music, like with jazz, I think, especially if you're not studying with anybody, like, okay, what am I going to practice today? Um, you have to have some kind of creative focus. I do.
Mhm.
Or am I going to learn tunes? Am I going to technique or whatever? But with classical and with lessons, it's like even if you don't have anything in your head going on musically, there's always something to do.
Sure.
So I enjoy that. Like, okay, I can just play my scales at a certain tempo, or I wasn't as focused on that in the past. So I've been enjoying that. And my teacher is very supportive and speaks as if I'm not like an old guy with that much of a future. She's like, well, when you play under a conductor or when you start teaching, I'm like, I don't know. But I enjoy learning it. I really do. And I know it comes in handy and, it shows in anyone's playing when they put in that kind of work. So
Sure.
it's been a great focus.
Nice. What kind of things are you going through? Is it a lot of scale studies or fingering studies or more progressive
A
fingerings?
lot
Because
of
jazz
fingering
players,
stuff, a lot of
yeah.
fingering, a lot of pieces in the two Sturm books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sturm 1 and Sturm 2. She also uses these books called String Builder, which has to do with slurs like, between an F sharp on the D string and a G, open G, getting the slurs really clean, three note slurs and so forth. So that's a lot of what I've been working on with her technical things. And she's really cool because she's not, she realized I have a lot of playing behind me, and she's not trying to like redo everything that I've worked on myself.
Right.
So she's really incorporating her approach with what I've worked out on my own.
Yeah.
And so it's great. So I don't know. I mean, obviously it helps with reading.
Mm-hmm.
Um, whenever the only reading things I've done around here in LA since I moved here have been mostly just like big band things.
Mm-hmm.
And the fight thing about when you get called to do a big band, it's like you have no idea what the reading level is going to be. And
Mm-hmm.
within any band, you could have some really easy charts. They have the old bands that have been together forever have stacks of charts, right? So
Right.
you never know what they're going to pull out, and sometimes it's some really tough stuff, and sometimes it's some really easy stuff. And I played with one big band this year, and first day I showed up there, everything that they pulled out was really easy. So I made a wonderful impression.
Yeah.
And then the next time uh, was more difficult, but they called me back still. So
Okay.
I'm hanging in there. As I was saying to you the other day, I feel the reading level in LA in general is higher than in New York. There's not much
Mm-hmm.
of a pressure in New York to read well.
Right.
But I'm glad I got into that because the thing about reading that has always confounded me is that conceptually it's very simple, right? Like we know where the notes on the instrument are. We can read the notes. It's just the quickness of it. If somebody gives you a chart with half notes on it, you just go boom, boom, or boom. It's really simple. For some reason, when it gets quicker, it's just harder. It's just harder, but conceptually, it's just as simple. Like we all can break I mean, unless you're getting into really odd time signatures like against each other, a five and then a seven, then a two, and then a 6/8. That's not as simple conceptually. But when you're reading in mostly four, we can all, most of us, divide the bar into 16 16th notes and play those rhythms and play the notes on the bass clef. But when it gets quick, it's a lot
Right.
harder.
Yeah, I think the more I've really focused on reading, and even when I do transcriptions myself, I've become really adamant about how how it's written. Like are they beamed properly so you can just look at the bar and see where all the beats fall? Like if it's beamed awkwardly or something, I have a hard time with that. And I've even seen like some students will bring in charts that they have to play for school or something. I'm like, man, this chart is a mess. Like this, they're not doing you any favors sometimes with how things are written.
it's much harder to read when it's a mess. I got together with some guys the other day, and I don't know if they'll hear this or not, but it was just a saxophone player and a drummer, and musically we had a really good time. We played all these really cool songs by the sax player. For some reason, he wrote all the charts on staff paper that had treble clefs on every line. And he's just like, just ignore that. It's really hard for me to do. I see
Yeah.
treble,
And your
and
brain
probably
flips.
in each song there was probably one or two notes in treble clef, right? Just to screw you up. So you had to be on guard. So
Yeah,
just to see the treble clef on the left it's I don't know. It just makes it confounds my little brain.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like reading is a skill that needs to be worked on like any other thing we do, but if it's not presented in a way to have the performer succeed,
Yes.
it just creates other complications. And then like we internalize it like, oh man, my reading's crap. I got to get this together. Like, well, maybe their writing is crap. Not musically what they wrote, like their ideas, but how they put it on paper. Like you got
Right.
to do that correctly. Like there's an art, to that to make sure that you're communicating your ideas properly.
Oh, absolutely. And especially, when someone comes and plays your stuff for free, just for fun. And I've always tried, the least you can do is present them with something that's pleasant to look at,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's something that you can, and it, uh, and I don't mean to like put anybody down because
So,
you never know the reasons behind why somebody does what they do. So I wouldn't judge. It's just a lot easier when it looks nice to look at.
yes. Yes. I
Uh,
will I will agree with that. I will absolutely agree with that.
Um, like one thing I did last year, I got called to play with a band that it's a dance band over at I forgot the name of the place. It's in North Hollywood. Oh, the Mayflower Club, it's called. Have you ever played
Okay.
there? It's
No.
like old, not that old, like from the 50s. It looked like it was a Jewish temple that got converted into some other kind of club. And they were doing Latin dance lessons, right? So the guy that
Okay.
choreographed dance lessons, and then they had a band. And so we played all Latin. I'm not a Latin guy, even though I love the music. But I noticed that when you're reading down Latin bass lines, there's really only two notes a bar, usually, right? Two or
Mhm.
three notes in a bar. So I got by pretty well. And then I really, okay, I'm going to really focus on Latin bass playing. And I got this book by Oscar Stagnaro, which is a really fun book to work through. He has great tracks, and it's really fun to play with. So that helped my reading a lot too. Because there's something
Nice.
you want. The first thing that I really learned to read when the Motown book came out in
Okay.
1980, and I had already been playing professionally, but not getting called for much reading stuff. Simple chord chart stuff, which is what 75-80% of work you're going to do. But when that book came out, that was great because so many of the songs, every bar is different,
Sure.
and they're great, and they're just things I always wanted to learn. I still have my copy at the show. It's really messed up and wonderful.
I've actually never gone through that book. I've never seen it. I mean, like
Oh,
I've seen the book, but I've never read it. I did, my own personal investigation,
yeah, I
transcribing
noticed
the
you
news.
did some of your transcriptions of the same ones that are in the book, and I'll have to
Yeah,
contrast and compare.
do
Uh,
do. I
Probably
will
I
say
can.
this: I don't know uh, I don't know what's in the Motown Standing in the Shadows book. I mean, it's of course all the same tunes because they're just great lines, and
Yeah.
anything Jameson played on is gold in my book. But I have compared my transcriptions to other books, like published books, and I'm not saying this just because I did it, but I know mine is accurate. Like I slowed it down and went over it multiple times and got made sure things are correct. The stuff in the book isn't always accurate.
No, I mean, look, there's
And
people make mistakes.
yeah, and I'm not faulting the publisher or anybody for
It
that,
could be the
but
copyist, it could be, it could be the original what the guy that did the transcription gave to the copyist, but it also could be the copyist because back in the
yeah,
day they usually weren't the same person. Right
right,
now we all do it, online, so we could, it's Sibelius or whatever. Uh, so you never know whose fault it is. Also, back in the day when you were doing it with the real needle drop, it was much
right.
harder to get.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. I'm sure since they have done the Motown book, technology, what I used to transcribe wasn't available then, so I'm not sure what they were using then. I would like to read up on that though to see. A lot of times they'll talk about in the beginning of the book what was used to get the transcriptions. What they
I
used to
don't
transcribe.
think that they addressed that in this book. I
Okay,
don't think so. Because
okay,
back then there was, I mean, it was before computers, so it was
right,
like either the cassette or the LP, I guess.
right, and
With the
just like
cassette,
yeah,
you could kind of slow down a little easier if you
right.
had the right equipment.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
easier to rewind.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Mhm. But
Nice.
that's how I really got my reading together. It's really what I wanted to read.
But you've also played with some. I mean, you played with Benny King.
I was
Like
with
you
Benny
played with a
King
lot
for
of the
many
guys
years.
from that era that were a part of that music.
Well, Benny wasn't a Motown act. He was
No,
an Atlantic act, and his bass lines were very simple. Of course, Stand By
sure.
Me, and uh, but yeah, it was always wonderful to play with him, and he was a great singer. Even when he had a stroke about, I don't know, 15 years before he passed, and his voice never came back exactly to what it was, but he worked, and he just had beautiful phrasing and a beautiful sound, and he was a sweet guy to work with. So
That's
uh,
cool. How
yeah.
long were you in his band?
Well, it was funny because I was in his band on and off, I would say, starting in about 92, 93, and in and then until he passed away. But what was odd that happened is that in 1994, or even earlier, there was a Broadway show called Smokey Joe's Cafe, which was the music of Lieber and Stoller, and they had written a lot of the songs that Benny had hits with. So I had to leave the real Benny King gig for the fake Benny King gig that paid a lot more, you know. Um, and the reason I think the reason I got that show, which ran for 5 years on Broadway, we actually started it before Broadway. We started it here for a few months in at late '94, and uh, yeah, it was like cover. It was singers covering Benny. But then Benny would come in on Broadway to do the show with us sometimes.
Okay.
It was a show that when we needed extra sales, we could bring in well-known artists, and they could. It was
Right.
just a review. There's no talking, just no book. They're just song to song, or choreographed. And so yeah, I that ran for 5 years, and then when that ended, I started with Benny again, on and off, whenever I was in town. I mean, Benny didn't. He had always had a regular band, but he didn't take his regular band all over the world. I mean, his stuff was fairly simple to play, and his book was
Sure.
correct. So we would play. He would bring his band on gigs that paid really well, which was usually like New York or LA or around the States or Japan. We played in Japan quite a bit.
Okay.
Um, so that was good. That was a great gig. That was really fun
Yeah.
to work.
Right. Did you ever put it to him like that? Like, yo, I left your band to go do covers. Like to go play your
Probably.
music somewhere else for more money?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I didn't want to. I don't remember actually. I mean, I said that a million times because it was just true. So
Sure.
I don't think it would have been weird to say it to him because I
Right.
mean he knew that it paid a lot more than he did. So
Yeah.
it was pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Um,
I remember a couple years ago. I'm trying to see how many names I should use in this story. A drummer called me up. He's like, "Yo, man, like, come down the street, meet me. Let's get some lunch." All right, cool. Go down there. He's like, "Yo, man, the bass chair is opening up in Frankie Valli's band. You want to do it?"
whoa.
I'm like, like, what's the calendar like? How often you go out? What's the pay? Like, what are some details? He tells me, I'm like, dude, I make more money covering him with this other guy I work with. Like, I kind of want to work with Frankie because he's an icon and that would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, do a little, bump up the resume a little bit, but
Sure.
financially it wasn't cool enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the way it is
Yeah.
sometimes. I mean, who knows what acts pay what they pay, and I mean, with Benny. It wasn't a lot, but it was easy. And if you couldn't make the gig, there was never any pressure. Like,
See that's
send us stuff.
important. You
Excuse
know,
me?
that's important. That like
Yes.
he's not asking to be the priority when the pay
Right,
isn't priority pay.
right, right.
Yeah.
But they were sweet, and his manager was very sweet. Probably owe him a call. He's still around. Um, and it was a nice, nice people. We all got along. That was great. That was really good. Um, but Smokey Joe's was a very fortunate thing that happened. When we did that show, so many people came in, would come in a week at a time. Rick Springfield did it, Gladys Knight did it, and
Oh
Lou
wow.
Rawls did it.
Okay.
So it was wonderful, just getting to play behind them without any pressure. And it was fun for them too because they got to do this was songs from the 50s, so they got to do songs that they grew up on. Those people are a little
Right.
older than me. And, they didn't have to worry about doing all their hits, and it was a nice payday for them. So we had a lot of really interesting people to come in and do that show.
So Smokey Joe's, is it a review of like kind of early R&B doo-wop stuff, or is it just Atlantic artists, or what's kind of
Now,
the
it was
the
just
structure to the
songs
show?
by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller,
Okay.
and a
Okay. Right.
few
You
things that
mentioned.
they co-wrote. So it
Okay.
was a lot of songs by the Coasters, a lot of songs by the Drifters, which Benny was a member of,
Sure.
uh, and then some things that I don't remember all the other Ruth Brown. Um, they would just and they just took a couple of songs they put in there that weren't big hits, but that they liked. Actually, all the songs were put together by one of the producers. I think it was Tom Bertel. His name is him, or it was either him or his brother. And when we started it, the first workshop, the order of songs was the same, almost identical as when it went to Broadway, and it went through a lot of personnel changes. A lot of times when you start a show, you do a workshop, you never know who's going to end up on the show when it
Sure.
hopefully, goes to Broadway. And in this particular show, from the first workshop, the only people that were still there were myself and the drummer. So it went through a lot of changes, but it was fun, and it was 5 years, so there were good parts and challenging parts as
Sure.
well.
Sure. Who
But
is Benny's MD?
Well, okay. Benny's and musical director, the times for the years that I was with him, I know it ended up being a good friend of mine named Al Orlo, guitarist,
Okay.
and might have been he was in the band when I started doing it. I don't think he was the musical director. Maybe it was either uh, Dave Longworth, or there was a guy named Bruce Kapler who was the sax player on the Letterman show when they added the horns.
Okay.
He was in the band, so he might. I don't remember
The only
exactly.
reason I ask is because one of Benny's MDs reached out to me. I don't know. This must have been like a year and a half ago, and had me on his show. And I can't. I forgot his name. Maybe if I go, scrolling through emails or something. But he
Well,
worked with the Drifters, and I believe he was either a guitar player or a piano player.
Okay, well, Benny. I mean, there are a lot of people that MD'd his show, like when Benny wasn't using his regular band, but he
Right.
usually took Al. Like in the last 10, 15 years of his life, he would always take the guy who was the musical director on the road. Now, Al doesn't have a show, but
Okay.
a lot of people could have MD'd his show now and again. I mean, Benny got out a lot, and he did a lot of situations. Uh, all sorts of performance situations. So, but Al was his musical director for the last 15 20 years of his life for sure.
Okay. I'm trying to see if I can remember his.
Not to say that someone else couldn't have done it if Al couldn't make it, or if Benny was asked to come in to do something else that was already established, like all the stars, if some theater is doing the Stars of Atlantic Records and they have their own
Right.
band, then someone in that band could have MD'd for Benny. I mean, it wasn't a hard job for an MD. A lot of people.
I'll at some point I'll track it down and bounce the name off you. I'm actually scrolling through my phone right now. Yeah, I don't think I can. I don't think I can track it down right now. But
And then,
if I
of course, there
do,
was the Drifters, which was a completely different organization.
but
And
this MD guy did both.
well, I don't. I mean, I can't
Yeah, I,
remember.
I I don't know why I wanted to think it's Michael or Miles or whatever. I don't know.
Michael
Now I'm
who?
just no.
No,
I don't know. I was Michael or Miles, but
no.
I feel like there was an M involved somehow.
But
Anyways,
it could have been anybody who did it now and again or somewhere. You Um, so that's the Benny story. So that was a gig for a while.
yeah. Now you also
Uh,
played with like some straight ahead heavies, right? You got kind of coming up early. You were playing at the Vanguard with Wayne Marsh.
yeah, Warren Marsh.
Warren Marsh, my bad.
Warren was a tenor player who grew up here. His parents and his whole family was in the film business. His aunt was Mae Marsh, who was an early, I think, silent movie star. And
Oh,
Warren, at some point, had gone east and had become a student of Lenny Tristano. And
okay.
so for those who don't know who Lenny is, Lenny was what you would call, he was a bop to post bop pianist. He was a blind guy and really had his own style. And it was very complex. Uh, although, and he had a teaching system, which in
Hmm.
itself was not complex. It was very harmonic based. And at the time, I was studying with a pianist student of Lenny's named Sal Mosca. So there was a lot of students of those people, that scene that played together. And I met Warren at a jam session. And, he liked my playing enough. I feel like I have this fantasy, Ryan, like you should have a bell. So whenever anyone your interviews, you interview like talks like gives himself a compliment, you should ding.
I should ring the bell. I might
Yeah, you have
start
a
that.
bell
Maybe I
like
can get some
three,
kind of sound
you should
effect
have
thing
like
happening.
three dings and then it's over or something like that. Okay, that's one right there.
I mean, all
Uh,
you said was he liked your playing at a jam session. You weren't
Okay, you like my
you
playing,
weren't
and so
being
I did
overly.
end up playing with him. Yeah, it was great. He hired me and one of the drummers on the scene. Oh, Tim Pleasant, you know Tim,
Oh yeah, I do.
right? So the first week we did at the Vanguard was with Tim and Sal Mosca, my teacher, and it was way above my head. Uh, but I hung in there, and those guys didn't they had something against playing with seasoned professionals. They wanted people who were really open, who didn't bring a preconceived idea of how to play the songs to the bandstand. So that
Hmm.
they wanted that. Um, I was still struggling. They wouldn't. I would just do whatever they said. Which is you cannot use a microphone or an amplifier.
Right.
So there is a CD release. Sal Mosk and Warren Marsh. We probably couldn't use the Vanguard on the CD release without paying them, so it just says Sal Mosk and Warren Marsh live or whatever, and it's on YouTube and all that. And yeah, it was really challenging, and Warren was inspirational to play with, and we played a bit in Europe together, and that helped my career there. I was able to bring my own group over and work quite a bit in Holland, France, and Belgium area. Um, and it was
What
just,
was the
one
what
of
was the nature of your group? Was it another kind of classic quartet instrumentation?
Yeah, well, what happened was there was a certain agent who was a big fan of Warren's and a fan of another sax player that I played with, who was great but very different. His name was Keshavan Maslach. Um, he was a more avant-garde, what they call at the time, sax player. Wonderful player. Again, someone well, I really didn't understand what he did, but for some reason I was in the band. That doesn't get a ring. I was just in the band. So anyway, so this agent said, okay, well, you've done enough stuff around here, so I can book you. And I put a group together, and we played a lot of the same, the standards. That Lenny's music was based on standards, and so we played a lot of those. And I would go over there a few times a year for a few years, and then it wasn't really what I wanted to do, and it wasn't paying a lot, but it was a good experience. And so I did that for a while. But at the time, I was really getting tired of not playing electric.
Mm.
And I really wanted to, play more soul and funk stuff and not just the swing. And so shortly after that, I got to play with Cornell Dupree and Richard T. And those group, after stuff had broken up, there was a popular band in New York of instrumental rhythm and blues players, studio players, and they were very popular, and I loved them. And they broke up, and when they reformed into like three different bands. And one of them was Cornell and Richard and Chris Parker, which was from the original Stuff band. And I ended up being the bass player by the time they recorded their first album. And it was a wonderful experience.
Nice.
Cornell was a huge fan of his. I was a huge fan. So I
Yeah.
played with him a lot for many years. Not on everything he did, but on a lot of things.
Okay. Now, were you
And
also during that time? Were you just focused on electric, or were you also doing some jazz gigs on the side to keep that muscle flexed?
no, I have to say I went through a long period of time where the upright was really on the back burner, and it was because I was just working a lot on electric, and I I I wasn't inspired to play
Mm.
the upright a lot. I had gotten a little tired of the scene, the way everything was going on in New York at the time. I didn't feel like I fit in, and I just was really more into playing upright. I had seen Marcus Miller. I, did I had heard Marcus a lot. I heard him live a lot, and so seeing that was an inspiration. I heard Marcus and Jocko play together one night.
Oh, crazy! Where was
Yeah.
that?
There was a place, and people were around at the time. Now we'll talk about this. I want to say this was, oh my God, I'm getting my years confused now. I guess this was still, oh, well, I remember exactly. It was like around 84. There was a
Okay.
place called 55 Grand Street, not to
Okay.
be confused with the 55 Bar, which is
Right.
a
Right. Right.
place in New York that was, there were similar kinds of music played at both places. 55 Grand Street was on 55 Grand. And Marcus was beginning to put together the band that became the Jamaica Boys,
Mm.
and which was Marcus and the late Bernard Wright, amazing player. I have to see him to believe him. And Lenny White on drums. He had a different guitar player than the guy that he ended up with at the time. But I remember getting to the club, and it was a small place. I mean, people, those guys were still playing small rooms at the time. and Jocko was there, and he had the first Yamaha DX7 synthesizer I had ever seen. And
Okay.
so Jocko was playing the synth. And there was a huge buzz about that time. That was a game-changing piece of equipment. The digital synthesizer was big change. And so I just remember they were playing, it was great. And then Jocko got up and they did some double bass stuff, and it was wonderful. It was just very inspirational. And um, I got to hear them a lot after that as well. I heard Marcus one time, can maybe ring the bell on this one. I was playing a festival with Cornell in Japan, and we were backing up Sadao Watanabe, has been the biggest sax player in Japan for his whole life, the last 60, 70 years or whatever. And so Marcus's band opened for us. And I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to pull this off? And it was a really beautiful thing because it was nothing but inspiration. Like I wasn't really prepared for that. Like
Hmm.
prepared for something difficult, for something competitive. And they were playing at such a high level that it's just like you just take in whatever you can, and it just
Yeah.
buoys emotionally, spiritually. Seeing Bernard play with him, it was really uplifting stuff. And so we had a great show. You can see it, you can hear it. It's on YouTube. It's live in Asahika in 1988,
Okay.
best north of Japan.
Cool.
And at the time, Buddy Williams was playing drums with us, and Buddy had played a lot with Marcus. So I'm like, here I am, and I don't play like that. I mean, I can slap and everything, but live, I don't do that so
Right.
much.
Right. Sure.
In a more
Well, I mean, Marcus took it to a whole another level.
it was, but Bernard, you had to see him. Did you? I guess did you ever see Bernard play live?
No. No. Now
Well,
I know
he ended
one
up playing.
tune called Habo Glabo Tribbin that Marcus is on of Bernard's. That's a
Okay,
cool tune. I think
Bernard.
that's the same Bernard.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Well,
Yeah.
Bernard moved to Texas for I think more personal reasons, and he ended up playing with the Snarky Puppy.
Oh, okay.
So they connected with him and he became their guru, and you could really hear it in their music. But Bernard was like one of these guys, you had to see it. I mean, it's not just what you hear. He was a very spiritual guy.
Hmm.
And I got to play with him a little in New York. At one point in the 90s, I had discovered a young guitar player who became very successful named Oz Noy. Do you know who
No,
Oz is?
I'm a huge
So,
Osnoy fan. Yeah.
what? Oh, okay, great. Well, I discovered. Ding.
Ding 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 ding. That's like three rings.
Uh,
Yeah.
I remember there was a little club we played at a lot on the Upper West Side of Manhattan where I lived, and there was a party there, and it was the birthday for a drummer, and it was a bunch of people there, a small place, everyone knew each other. I don't want to say a bunch of people that were full of themselves, but a bunch of people that were successful and settled in a way, in
That is
con
incredibly diplomatic. That is incredibly
yes,
diplomatic.
because they're
Yeah.
still all my friends. But that was the vibe I had at the moment. And then I walk in and I see this kid. And he's like, I don't know who you are. I didn't know who he was. And then he gets on stage. It was a jam. And I hear him play, and everyone's kind of talking and partying. And I'm like I hear Oz play, and I think my impression of him in the beginning is he lives and breathes Stevie Ray Vaughan. Like that's his thing. Because he was really deep. I mean, his blues thing and his tone, and people are not really paying attention. And I'm going, "Hello, everybody. Do you see there's
Yeah.
something happening here?" So I didn't get a lot of people didn't really notice. Like their ears weren't open. I
Right.
have to say. And maybe some of them were, but I don't remember because I was the guy. I went up with him, I became friends with him, and I said, "Well, come over. We got to play." So he comes over and he brings me all this stuff, like Oz stuff, you know, his out stuff that he had already. This was '97, so he was just beginning to develop that, and
Mm.
uh, uh, and it was great. And we started playing together, and I played with him regularly from '97 till 2000 when I went on the road doing shows, and I
Okay.
informed him that he was going to be famous and fire me. And sure enough, as soon as I left, Will Lee started doing the gigs, and I'm sure
Yeah.
he would have started doing the gigs had I not left anyway. So I
Yeah.
left town. But Oz and I are still really close, and we do play together sometimes. And he's incredibly inspirational and a very good friend. And you know, he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah,
Besides
he's a
all the stuff.
fantastic player. I've seen a lot of the clips with him and Willie on
Yeah,
YouTube. He's love his playing.
yeah.
He
So he
comes out
was
here
great.
every once in a while. I think I see his name around town. Like he'll be at the Potato maybe like 2 or 3 times a year. I think
Right.
out here for something or other.
Yeah. But Oz was great to have around because besides being able to play very well, he had a huge repertoire of cover songs.
Hmm.
So we were doing a lot of weddings at the time. There were very few people in New York that weren't doing weddings, especially towards the end of the '90s, because they were fast becoming one of the better paying gigs around.
Yeah, yeah.
And you could put Oz on a cover gig, and it would be like he would know the same repertoire as guys who had been doing it for the last 20 years. I
Right.
mean, you could pull out any Bee Gees songs or Stevie Wonder songs, and he was right there. And of course, he was great enough that if he didn't know the song, he still would sound fantastic.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure.
So yeah, he was a good one to have around, and is still around a lot.
When we spoke the other day, you spoke about some of your time on Broadway. You want to touch on some of that? How'd you get involved
Oh,
getting
okay.
on the Broadway circuit? Let's just check in on it because I know that was a big part of what you did on the East
Well,
Coast.
thank you. Yeah, for remembering. Well, it was actually really funny because I was playing with Cornell and Richard T. and that group, and they were really popular in New York. And the guy, I guess I say, he was the main contractor of Broadway shows, and still does a lot. His name is John Miller, and he's a bassist, a very good bassist. And I get a call one day, and I had met him more socially. I'd sub for him here and there. Um, and he says, "Oh, there's this thing that I wish I could do, but I can't do it. I hope you can do it." He goes, "You know who Alan Toussaint is?" Well, of course. Alan Toussaint was like, the biggest songwriter, producer of New Orleans R&B music ever, pretty much.
Mhm.
So he goes, Alan has a show. He's bringing a show to Broadway and hopefully on Broadway. And there's a workshop. Can you do the workshop? Sure. So I go down there and we did a 2 week workshop of, it was all like New Orleans music. It was his songs, some Dr. John songs, like Neville Brothers songs, New Orleans hit funk music, meter songs.
Right.
It was like Smokey Joe's. It was no book, but choreographed and singing and dancing. And there was a young guy named who became very popular named Savion Glover, who was a tap
Hmm.
dancer, a very funky, great time. He was about 12 at the time. It was just beautiful what he was doing. And so we did this 2 week workshop. And there was a fantastic director. He was the director and star of the show named Alan Weeks. And he was, token up like as much as he can and just beautiful vision and performance, singing and dancing, stoned out of his gourd. And and Alan and Toussaint was like like writing songs, like, we could use this kind of song here, and we'd write a song, and it was really great. And I remember one time we were doing one of his songs that he had just written, and they decided that wouldn't work in the show. So Alan throws out the chart, and I go, "Wait a minute, we haven't recorded that yet. It's a great song." He's like, "Yeah, I'll write another one." So I can only imagine what great songs, ended up in the
Yeah.
garbage pail of Alan's. Um, about 2 years later, it went to Broadway, and it was a huge flop. It actually got a good review in the Times, but it didn't have enough advanced sales to continue. But it was great to work with Alan, again for about 3 or 4 weeks, and just try to, follow, get into his thing. So what happened is that he was a musical director, and he gave the contractor a good report about me. So
Mm.
it's when I think about it, it's funny because my uh, Broadway career is because of Alan Toussaint, which is
Okay.
weird. He's not a Broadway guy. Um, so I started realizing, oh, this is a good thing to get into, and I did some subbing, and some of that went well and some of it didn't go well. I was learning, and I was getting back to the upright then because a lot of it was doubling. And then the first show that I did really well on as a sub, just reopened as a revival, was Tommy.
Mm.
Um, and I played that a lot, and there were a lot of events surrounding the success of Tommy. And my own band got to be like the house band for all the Tommy events. So I got to play with Pete Townsend, and it
Oh,
was really
nice.
fun. That was 2 years there. So, and then Smokey Joe's came around, and I got to do that. And then, 5 years of that uh, I realized, okay, I've got to I had a son by that time, and I had to be a professional adult, and, couldn't live hand to mouth. And when that ended, as I had said before, that ended in early 2000, and I saw the demise of the studio scene, and I watched these studio players, wanting to do Broadway shows.
Sure.
And I realized, okay, this is going to be more competitive. So luckily by that time, my son was old enough so I could leave town, and I started doing the Broadway shows on the road. I did a lot of those. I did Rent. I did Saturday Night Fever, which was fun, playing the disco stuff, which I loved. And then I did Hairspray and Hair. I did a lot Beautiful over the years. So because of that, I got to when I was in town, I'd get to sub on a lot of shows because they knew I was a player, and that was great too. Because I mean, one show I subbed on a lot was Motown, which was
Okay.
just wonderful.
Sure.
Because that was a 20-piece band, about 1921, I don't know. They had two percussionists, three guitarists, like the real
Yeah.
records, and two percussionists, drums, just and 3 or 4 keyboards, a whole bunch of horns and strings. It was the real deal,
Nice.
and I got to do that quite a bit, and that was wonderful. Especially the second year, because I noticed, with the 20-piece orchestra, you're gonna have a lot of subs, right? And after the first year, when all the subs were really broken in, the band really took off because every
Sure.
time we put it there, it was wonderful. And then it closed prematurely because they could retool and open at a lower budget for the production. And when they did that, no one came, so that sucked.
Yeah. On
Um,
any of these shows that you had done for a long time, what kind of things would you do to stay mentally engaged and not check out when you're like 3 years into a book? How do you stay
okay,
mentally engaged with
okay,
performing?
that's a really interesting question, and I found for me one, and this goes for any gig you're on. You want the other people to be excited about doing the gig, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're on a gig and people are complaining all the time, all the bad parts, like playing the same thing over and over again, are going to start bugging you because what's coming into your head is all this negativity. Well, when I got on Rent, there was a great drummer, and he's still around, named Alan Childs. Alan had a good rock and roll career. He did a major David Bowie tour. He had been with Julian Lennon. He had been with John Waite, and he is still with John Waite now. And he's a very strong player. And I had met him on other gigs over the years. We had same taste in music, similar. So he was on Rent, and he had just the greatest attitude. He loved playing the same thing every night. He loved being on the road, and that was my drummer. And it was just it buoyed me up.
Mm,
It was, and there were some hard things about that gig. It wasn't the easiest gig for me in some ways. Um, but having Alan there really helped. And then when they put the Hairspray tour together a couple of years later, Alan was on that too. So I did 3 years with him on Hairspray. And so working with somebody like that, especially if it's the drummer, it makes it so much easier.
right.
Because he really enjoyed, I mean, he enjoyed playing the same thing over and over. He enjoyed being on the road. There was no complaining. And it was like, if you had said to Alan, this gig is going to last for 20 years, you want to sign up? He would have signed up.
Well.
I mean, I can't speak for you, Alan, if you're hearing this, but that's my guess. Um, and so that's one of the things. It's the culture that you're surrounded with really makes a difference.
Sure.
And Rent was a little hard, but that for other reasons, but that only lasted about a year and 4 months. Saturday Night Fever was just a year, and that was a group of people again that got along really well. There were some musical things there. It was weird because that show they used electronic drums, and I for some reason I had to play a five-string bass with round wounds, and their big hits I guess it's come to light that one of the Bee Gees played bass on a lot of that stuff, and you could hear it's very simplistic lines, very well composed, but not slickly performed, like on
Right.
Night Fever, and they just fit really well. And I wanted to play with that kind of sound, like the sound of the rhythm section was very
Sure.
different than the records. So
Mm,
it wasn't hard, but it was a little disappointing. And
sure.
then course, and then we started Hairspray. And what was easy, well, I'll tell you a story about Hairspray that was funny. And and one thing I like to say about Broadway in general is I know a lot of young people are trying to get into it now, and it's a very good gig. You never fool yourself, and a lot of people do in the beginning, like doing Broadway from show to show. It's all Broadway. Every show is different. It's like it's like the difference is playing in Tina Turner's band and Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Sure.
It's really different. So
Yeah,
doing
it's a totally
Broadway,
different camp. Like if it was equated to a tour, totally different tour manager, totally different artist, totally different, how you travel, the hotels, like the whole thing's different. Is the
it's
whole
all different.
organization. Yeah.
Exactly. Now there are a few similarities when you're working under the same contract. There are certain things that are predetermined by the union. And there's very little forgiveness for mistakes. I mean, if the conductor hears something, every conductor will say, I hear everything. You can't know that until you know for sure, right?
Right, right.
And a lot of times you don't. Some you will know, like Carl German at Lion King. I think he hears everything.
Okay.
Um, uh, but don't be fooled by the overriding name Broadway. It's all different. And to give you an example, so I get called to do the Hairspray tour. Before the tour starts, there's about 6 months where I could go in and sub on Broadway. The Broadway orchestra of Hairspray in 2000, when it started, 2003 or 4, was fantastic. The bassist is somebody that I hope gets more notoriety as the years go on. His name is Francisco Centeno, and he's one of the greats of New York groove bass playing. So he was there, and he was one of the studio guys that saw his work drop off and started doing Broadway. Great player. Clint Gannon on drums, wonderful, and David Spinoza. Do you know who David is?
I know the
Uh,
name.
David Spinoza was the top or among the top 5 New York recording guitarists in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, he played with, McCartney. He did records with McCartney, Lennon, James Taylor. He produced a James Taylor record on down.
Okay.
So David was one of the guitarists. So the band was slamming. So to go in there, and subbing for Francisco, playing at that level, it's great. It really pushed me up. But what happened is, so I went in there and I do the show, and the conductor says, "Great, just don't stick to the music so much." You don't get that on Broadway. Like, you just don't get that. I go in there again. Yeah, that's great. Just don't stick to the music. Don't stick to. This is the weirdest thing. I mean, I didn't believe it. I guess after the second or third show, I get a call from John Miller, who by this point would never say who it is. He just starts speaking because he knows I know his voice. And I remember it. He goes, what can we do to get you to do your own thing on Hairspray? Like, you want, I have a thing? Okay.
Yeah, right. I have a thing, and you want me to do it? Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, John knew my playing very well. He heard me in a lot of different situations. We had even played together, doing some double bass stuff. And so from then on, it went fine, but very inspirational, subbing for Frankie. We were both Frankie.
We'll be back right after this.
The International Society of Bassists, commonly referred to as ISB. Folks. All right, I'm here. If you don't know about ISB, stop by their website, ISB World Office. It's everything you need to know. It's like seriously everything. If you're a teacher, you can register as a teacher. You can find teachers. You can find all kinds of publications of sheet music, all kinds of information about the bass, about the programs they do, about their every 2-year conventions. They had one not last year, not this past summer, but the summer before. So that would have been the summer of 23, I believe. In Michigan, they're going to have another one come up in 2025. All the information is going to be at ISB World Office. All right, folks, I'm opening up the middle of this show, right? The most prized real estate of any podcast. I'm opening up the middle of the show to you. I want you guys to be able to get heard. So check out the link in the show notes below about getting featured on the Bass Shed podcast. And I want to build community. That's a big thing to me. I want this podcast to do that. If, maybe there's some bass players you hadn't heard of before that now you've gotten hip to, or some music you hadn't checked out before and now you've checked it out. That's a big deal to me, is community and building community, and that extends to you, the listener. Get heard on the Bass Shed podcast and get featured in a mid-roll ad for what you have going on. Check out the show notes below and click on Get Featured.
As far as on Broadway, you don't know what you're going to get into. You have to be open to, things coming from a direction that you don't know. Especially, when you're coming from, in the regular gigging world for bass players, and I don't know, like, people don't critique your playing, really, right? Like, they just go,
Not
sound
to your
great.
face.
They either pull you back or they don't, right?
Or they'll talk shit behind your back. Yeah.
Right. So so when you don't get called back, you don't know why. There's really a lot of mysteries I found, around that aspect of being a professional. You're either in there or you're out You're not
The
there. I mean,
weirdest one is when they call you regularly. Like they'll call you regularly, and then there's like a 2-3 month lag where they don't, and like you think like, well, whatever, I'm not getting the call anymore, and then they start calling you again. Then the phone call when there's inconsistency in either one. If they just stop, okay, didn't work out or whatever, blah blah blah. Who knows? Or if they call you a lot, then like, cool, you got the gig. But when it's sporadic, that's the one that always kind of gets in the back of my head. Like, well, what's going on here? Like,
I'll
if you
tell you
really
what-
want me in the band, like, fine, I'll learn the whole book and like we can just do it. But I'm not gonna
Right.
dedicate all the time when I don't know if, what are we doing here? That's the thing I get into.
You gotta start like spitballing. So I start thinking about what it could be, and what came to mind when you said that is it could be a situation where you first came in, one of their other subs wasn't available,
Right. That's
then
true.
maybe that person became available again,
Right.
and maybe they wanted to,
Yeah, I mean, that's happened
maybe
before.
they
I've
even
lost
liked
some.
you better. Maybe they
Right.
even liked you better, but they
No, I
wanted
mean, if I had the bell, I'd ring it for myself.
to.
Yeah.
Right, so you never know.
Sure.
Now where was this going? So with Broadway, and this is something I feel very, very strongly about. Some conductors, especially after your first or second show, will critique your show, and that's really helpful. Because you never know, um, what you did wrong if you played like a note perfect show, right? Like you read all the notes correctly or
Yeah.
almost all of them. So it usually comes down to a dynamic thing, which a lot of times you really can't know, because it might be a situation where you're the only person that's supposed to play louder at that, or you're the only
Right.
person. That happens a lot in Lion King. So, and but what happens, which is very difficult on Broadway, is some conductors just won't do that. Like they won't respect the fact that you put in maybe months before you came in and did that show.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's been times when I've been able to spend months. Other
Yeah.
times it was days. Like, okay, I really want to ace this. And you go in and you spend months, and if it doesn't work out, you want to know why.
Yeah.
And I find it very disrespectful on the part of a conductor to not tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
And that hasn't that only happened to me on one show, and it was the revival of Color Purple.
Okay.
And that was a really nice situation where the band was in a room, like just a room in the theater, not in the pit. And the first time I did it was one of those where, I had just watched it and the other sub couldn't do it, so I had to come in and I did well, and the conductor knew me, and he said, "You know what you missed, right?" I went, "Yeah, okay." That was I did the show, maybe about 7 or 8 times, and kept getting better and better. I know the sound guy really liked me. That's another thing. Your sound. The front of the house guy has a lot to say about a sub on Broadway because
Sure.
maybe it just isn't reading. It could be your bass. It could be the way it's just not present the way he wants it to be. That's a huge strike against you.
Now, quick interjection. When you're working with maybe conductors or front of house guys that you've worked with previously, and you kind of understand how they think and how they move, and do you cater the bass you bring to them maybe more than you would the show? Like if you have to pick between 2 electrics and like that one works for the show really well, but the sound guy loves this one, I'm gonna bring that one.
No, see that's not correct thinking, and I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't matter what I think works for the show.
Sure.
I don't have the power. It's what they think works for the show. There's no what I think. There's not a
Okay.
question. That's not a uh, that's not an argument. There's not no contention there. And I will tell you, in those days, what bass the front of the house guys love, and what it is. It's the mid to late 90 Fender Deluxe 5 string, the John Suhr era with the single pole pickup, single pole pickups. That this front of the house guys love that bass, love it. And my first one got stolen out of the Kennedy Center in Washington, but that's a bass
So
that
the
they
five
love.
string five string deluxe jazz.
American Deluxe Jazz Sir era, which is like
Okay.
95 to 98, single
Okay.
pole. And I just rebought one the other day. Now, I don't know if I'll ever need it, but I
Okay,
want
I
to
can
have it,
picture it now. I know what you're talking about. I think
right?
towards the
Right.
end of that era is when they did like the little 7/8 body. They had like kind of a
Yeah,
different, like it was like 97 or 98. It was a slightly different body style on the five string jazz that I love. I've gone
maybe.
like just bass hunting online trying to just find one of those.
I think it was maybe a little, yes, maybe 98, because
Yeah.
from and I think the Sirs stopped being produced around 98, because all
Okay.
the Sir single pole pickups that I've seen have the same body shape.
Okay.
Um, but I could be wrong. Let's see.
Yeah.
Anyway, so all right, so it went off on a tangent a little bit. That's the bass to use if you have one. It's very trustable, at least for the sound systems back in the day. I don't know
Sure.
what's
Sure.
happening now. So I forgot where I was going with that little
We
story.
were talking about reasons getting called back, getting notes from
Oh, okay,
conductors.
right,
Sound
okay,
guys
all
have a
right.
lot of impact.
Right. So the second color purple, right. So I know the sound guy really liked my playing a lot. And then I stopped getting called. And I was kind of like, and no one said anything. Now that's kind of like, that's frustrating. If something like, I was pissed off, like, either the guy with the chair should say something. Um or the conductor should say something. And no one had ever said a thing to me uh, after any of the shows. It felt great. The vibe in the room was great. People seemed real happy to have me there. Some of them said they were, but even that, it's hard to say. That's not politically correct to say to say too much good stuff about the sub. You want them
Mm.
to feel comfortable, but you don't want them to get a big head about it. That's a
Right.
very significant, subtle political point in Pits on Broadway. And so finally, I called the drummer, and he goes, "Yeah, I don't know what happened. I thought it was getting better. Getting better than what? I, no one had said anything,
Yeah.
So I felt like that type of stuff is disrespectful, because subs put in a lot of work, and it's a thankless job. And I'll tell you something else that's really tough on Broadway. If you have a chair, it's very hard to get fired. I mean, you
Right.
could go through a lot of personal shit. I know you could fuck up. You got to like hit the conductor in the face, or
Yeah.
really not show up a lot. I mean, you can on Broadway, you can sub out 50% of the time, and over that, there's 3 weeks of vacation and 8 shows, sick days.
Okay.
Plus, you could take a leave of absence. So it's really hard not to show up enough to keep the gig.
Right. Right.
Um, I only know of one person that happened to. Okay, where I'm going. Okay, so yeah, so if you have the chair, it's very hard to get fired. If you're a sub and you've played the show 200 times, a new conductor can come in and go, I don't like that guy. Don't call him anymore. No job protection. None.
Right, right.
None. And it's mean. It's rough. It's
Well, the thing
evil.
that sucks about that is you don't know, as a sub, you don't know who you're dealing with. Or maybe you know the conductor, but maybe they're just having a bad day. Maybe they want to vent. Maybe they want to take it out on somebody. Maybe they just want to flex and show that they have the power to, no, him out, somebody new in, and it just happens to be you. I mean, I think from doing this and talking to other bass players and even myself, sometimes bass players have a target on their back about like
Mm.
who's just kind of get the bad end of a stick sometimes. Like I've worked in groups where just the bass chair gets a little bit more flack than any other chair in the band, and it just for whatever reason.
Interesting.
You know, and so
Uh,
like it has nothing. There's no direct correlation to the playing. It's just this guy doing whatever that guy's doing. You know, the guy in charge.
yeah. And also, I have to say, I've only lived in LA for 4 years, and two of that was pandemic, so that doesn't even count. So, I'm talking about the New York Broadway scene
Sure.
and the tours that are coming out of, just to be clear, because I haven't worked for any of the LA contractors, although I've worked with them, but not for them. Um, so, yes. So, the subs have no job protection. Also, oh yeah, I wanted to say that the you get fired by the MD, but there are people above him. He might love you. The
Right.
conductor, the composer might come in one day and go, "Man, great job. I don't like that bass player. There's something about, I don't know what it is." Right? You know, and so forget about cause. There's no cause,
Yeah.
ever, and getting fired as a sub. I mean, if they're respectful, they'll give you a cause, but they don't have to. So it could be that. It could be the front of house guy. It could be the director there, because as John Miller will make clear, if you ever see one of his like seminars or whatever, there's a pecking order, and the conductor is your direct. Well, I would say the person directly above you might be the guy you're subbing for, but it's really the conductor.
Yeah.
And then above him, there's the composer, and there's this, and so any of the people from the high pecking order could come in and make a comment, and if it's easier for the conductor to just not call you and make it easier for them with their boss,
Exactly.
you're
Exactly.
gone.
Right.
You're gone. So it's ruthless. It's really hard, and now I'm thinking, man, I can't believe I actually did as well as I did. It's like, whoa, Well, because I mean, some shows really aren't that hard. And I'll tell you one thing, I think I got fired from Kinky Boots because I said that one time. Because Kinky
That
Boots,
shows
I
aren't
came
hard.
in, well, I said it about Kinky Boots. I came in one time. I was not one of the uh, original guys called for the sub. And when I heard that, I knew it had won the Tony Award for Best Musical, and it was going to go out on tour. I knew Mike Biseglia. I said,
Sure.
Mike, let me just come in and play the show once so they could hear me, because I'd love to do the tour. Okay. And I went in there, and I remember the day, because it was what, February 9th, 2004 is the 50th anniversary of the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. So
Okay.
I remember
Okay.
very well. So I went in there, I played it, and I ended up being one of the subs on the show. So I subbed the show a
Okay.
lot. I did not get the tour. I don't want to say why, but I didn't get the tour.
Now, ultimately,
Uh,
as things panned out, where you ended up subbing a lot, Viseglia was the contracted bass player.
no, no, he was just the bass player.
Okay, but I mean, it was
Yeah.
his show. Like he was the main guy.
Yes, he was
Yeah. Okay.
he had the chair. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So I did it a lot, and I think the reason I was just an easy show. So for bass, not easy for drums or guitar, but for bass, it's easy. I will stick to that. Anyway, one day we were just having a conversation. I was just saying to someone, I play a lot of other shows, and this is the easiest show.
Yeah.
And the insistent conductor heard me, and when he became the conductor, no Frank Canino. And the guy with his
Why? Because
Biseglia
he
had
didn't want
left.
it to get to the higher ups that it would come across as if you were disrespecting the music or the production or
I think
the
he thought I
compositions.
think I just thought he was that he disrespected me because the guy that did take over the book after Mike left, I had subbed for a lot on Mamma Mia, and was a much harder show for bass. And Paul said, "Yeah, for some reason I can't call you. I don't know why." I asked why, and he wouldn't tell me why. So these things happen. And can I relate to you just for buyer beware?
Yeah.
A major time. Now, I don't want to, I can say things that'll ring the bell, and I will also complain about times where I got screwed. There is a show called Spring Awakening,
I've played that show.
and it's a really good show.
It was fun.
Um,
I remember it being a
uh,
rock show.
I would say, of all the shows I've ever played, I think that show could have just been a record. And it didn't even,
Hmm.
the songs were so tight. Um, that Duncan Sheik was the composer.
Okay.
It could have been a record.
Did you play that
Anyway,
on Broadway?
I subbed it on Broadway.
Okay.
So I go in there the first time. Um, uh, I had to play what the bass player played, which was not in the book.
Okay.
I had to rewrite the book, and I just knew that I looked at the book, and I knew that had to be done. Uh, I went in. Now the bass is on stage. The whole band's on stage, and the
Hmm.
bass is upstage, but right in the center. And I was, I guess, well into my 50s at the time, obviously older than everybody else on stage, and I was also quite a bit heavier at the time, and probably didn't like look lovely compared to all the other kids on stage.
You did, yeah.
But I go in there, and there was a guy conducting that had taken over the conductor chair for a while. And I do the show, and he goes, "Great, great." The guy who has the chair calls me back, goes, "Hey, you did great. I want you to come in next week so you can get designated." A designated sub on Broadway is a sub that can come in with any configuration of the band, right? So if you're not designated, you might not be able to be called in if there's already a guitar and a drum sub.
I
Okay,
see. Okay.
right. But a designated sub could come in anytime. I go in the
Right.
second time, I get designated, go out for drinks with the conductor, with mutual friends. Actually, Alan Childs was there that night, I remember, in the audience. And everything's great. Then that conductor leaves, and the regular conductor comes back. I think I go in once. Didn't say a thing. No calls. Um, uh, no more calls. Just like you said, no more calls.
Yeah.
And around a few months later, I get a call. Frank, um, I won't say who the call is from, but it's from someone involved in the production. We hear you have the best bass book, right? Like you've transcribed it the best.
Okay.
And there's going to be a tour. Can we use your book? We'll pay you. You'll get paid. Sure, I already wrote the book, and I'd love to do the tour. Great. Well, long story short, not only did I not get paid, not only did I not get the tour, but they hired someone. The bass was half up, the chair was half upright and half electric.
Hmm.
They hired a young lady who had not subbed the show, did not play she did not own an electric bass. She only played upright. So not only did I have the best book that they said that they were going to pay me for,
Yeah.
they hired someone for the gig that didn't play the instrument.
Right. Right.
And wait a minute, insult to injury. If that isn't enough, I believe whoever is it, the arranger or that gets the Tony Award for best arrangements. The book was unusable,
Yeah.
and he got the Tony Award. So this is what you're up against, children. It's not just me. It's. I mean, obviously that was an extreme case and over a long career. I mean, it's the exception to the rule of what's going to happen. But these are the it's really rough out there. you
Sure.
know? So any show that you do, you have to do with the attitude of the worst that can happen is that I could become a better player by practicing this music.
Right. Right. Right.
And that happened to me actually as a keyboard player. I went in and subbed on Mamma Mia. I used to do Mamma Mia subs on the road, and that would be like 3 or 4 weeks at a time.
Okay.
And the woman that was the conductor at the time said, "Oh, really, I really like you. I'm sorry you have to leave. Do you play keyboard four?" And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I could do that. I'll learn it and I'll let you know. And then because they always use different keyboard four subs. So I spent a lot of time learning keyboard four.
Okay.
And click like this. And the whole time I'm thinking, if nothing else, it'll be really good for my keyboard playing. Because, I'm one of these guys that, I'm working at home and, doing tracks. And I do a lot of keyboard playing. And the woman that had asked me to do that, she takes another gig. She's not there anymore. I called the contractor. I said, "Look, the conductor had asked me if I could play keyboard four, and I learned it. They never called me again. So yeah, I became a much better keyboard
um, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. A couple things I want to touch on. You just mentioned it actually, and we didn't talk about this the other day on the phone. Uh, I'll let you pick which one. I'm going to drop a couple topics here, and then you pick where you want to choose your own adventure
all right,
podcast.
all right.
What kind of tracks are you doing at the house? Is it production stuff, production, composing, like jingles? What kind of things are that? That's category one. Two, what are some of the things? Although there's, your career has gone through road work, has gone through jazz playing with standards, and it's taken a lot of turns, and there's a lot of versatility there. What are some fundamentals or characteristics that have been through lines that you could, say were helped your success in the music business? Anybody making a living at this shit, it's success. That's what I think.
Yeah, right.
And so like, what might some of those elements have been through all of this that have been helped with the success of your career?
Well, the first question is very easy. I do one thing I do a lot of. I have done. I just make my own songs and I put them on
Okay.
Spotify. So if you go Frank Canino on Spotify, there's like 3 songs that I wrote and recorded by myself and sing them, and just for fun.
Yeah.
Because I'm inspired to do songs, and I wish I could write more. Um, I wish I could be more of a writer. I write a little, some,
Mm.
but it's never been my main source of income. Although recently I did a small documentary, and
That's
that
fun.
went well. So it's been a little of everything. Not I haven't done any jingles by myself, but I'll do tracks for other people, like singers that are going to go out and do track dates. I could do
Okay.
those because I can play guitar and do all the rhythm section stuff. So it's been a variety. Um, yeah, that's been a
What
variety.
was
But
what was the documentary? Not only do I just love
oh,
documentaries, but
the
I'm interested in that.
documentary is well, I went to high school in a town. I was brought up in the Bronx in New York. My mom taught school in a really affluent suburb called Scarsdale, New York.
Hmm.
You might know from the song "Hey 19." Moved out to Scarsdale. Where the hell am I?
Yeah.
Um, and it was a great experience. And I have a lot of friends from high school, and actually, we're thinking about making a documentary about our era. But and so the Scarsdale Historical Society makes these little films, and and a friend of mine directs them and edits them, and a girl I was in ninth grade homeroom with, and so I did it for her.
Oh, cool.
So that's what that was. As far as a through line, it's really interesting. I feel that a lot of my career is was determined by what was available to me.
Hmm.
Um, so I remember in the late 70s, I'd started doing some stuff in New York, and then I had some problems like, oh, this gig didn't go well, that gig didn't go well. And some of my upright gigs were going very well. So I would say probably from 78 to 85, 84, 85, a lot of my gigs, not all, were upright jazz gigs because that's just what seemed to was going well. At the time, when you're young, it's much easier to memorize stuff. So I knew a lot of tunes, I knew a lot of standards. That was easy for me to memorize. So what are the aspects of bass playing from that translate to all other genres? Well, groove, obviously. Um, Good memorization skills. Uh, I would say those are. Oh, and I was a good soloist, better soloist on upright than on electric, I thought.
Hmm.
Um, So, because for sound, the sound of an upright inspires me to solo more than the sound of an electric. It's just the way that I am. Um, so I would say, the very basics, like just groove, knowing the tune. Of course, a lot of people will say showing up on time. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, anything
Uh,
you would do to keep any
yeah,
job, those are always
was
helpful.
very basic. Now, the next part of my career, so in the mid 80s, my son was born in 84. I had to make more money, so I was able to get into the wedding band scene. Paid very well. Like you could do, you could make 600-700 bucks on a weekend, and in those days that could be your living. Like you could live
Right.
on that. And extra things in New York like a club gig or a jingle or around, would just be extra. What helped me with the weddings were I was good at memorization. I
Hmm.
knew the tunes. I
Right.
came in there, they didn't know me, but I knew all the tunes. And a lot of that already we're getting into. There's always that through line of when you're involved in the kind of music that you like, that resonates well with you,
Sure.
you'll always get better at it. So there's always been that uh, a little bit of rub for a lot of professional musicians between wanting to get everything you're called for and wanting to do well on everything you're called for and sticking with what really resonates, with you. There are people who have the toolbox to pretty much, like Will Lee, he was able to, adapt his style to almost anything. But I think that's because he loves music so much.
Hmm.
I mean, I think that that's what really comes out with Will is the love.
You sure?
It's, it's pretty much that simple. Because, well, I could get into that too much of a related topic, but you want to stay in the lane of what inspires you. You want to be
Right.
on the you like. You don't want you want. And now the wedding band scene was tough because a lot of the people on those gigs gave off the attitude, I'm just doing this till I get my record deal.
Sure.
Luck, it was very annoying. Very few of them did get record deals. But um, so obviously attitude is good. But sometimes the culture is to rag on the gig. And if you don't rag on
Yeah.
the gig and The culture is you're going to stick out. That doesn't happen so much anymore because everybody realizes now what you said. If you're making a living, it's a gift. You're
I mean,
successful.
I think that, but I do think that ragging on the gig, there's a culture there of this idea that musicians have a lot of whatever gig they're on, they're better than this and they should be doing more. And then so if they're, if you're playing whatever, like jazz trio, or if you're doing a wedding or you're doing just whatever, yeah, this is, and you can find any piece of the gig to use as the scapegoat, whether it's the pay or nobody's listening or it's whatever. You should always be
Right.
higher than you are, is the mentality that I think the gig ragging culture comes from, and that gets annoying.
Well, not only is it annoying, but that attitude, it if you know if you bring that into other situations, you're really going to hurt yourself. I mean, one of them is that connects the conversely is the imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're on a gig with people that or me, are much more successful than I am, and I think are better.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not good. The imposter syndrome will hurt you as
Sure.
much as the converse of it, which is I'm better than this.
Right. Right.
It's really about getting into the headspace of we're all in this together. We got to make this as good as it can be together, and that's really what it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That's
even
right.
these guys, I used to play a lot with Richard T, who was the most respected studio player and R&B player in New York for 20 years, 30 years maybe. And he would ask me, well, what are you doing here? He would say things to me, well, I want to know what you're doing because if I do something different, I'm going to sound wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? So these people that are coming in there with 100% confident attitudes, their ears are still out there, like knowing that they can end up sounding bad if they don't connect to everybody that's
Right.
on that stage.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that's just a level of maturity that works on either side. Like we're all here together. We're just here to make this as good as it can be. Unfortunately, there are gigs where if you don't if make it as good as it can be, everyone's going to get away. Yes, at a wedding, people are there to have fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you just have to be good enough for people to have fun.
Right. 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 Yeah.
It
Just
isn't too
play.
good when they're drunk
Yeah.
and you're playing songs that they know. But that's just the level of you just have to get that and then learn how to operate in terms of that. You got to learn it and then you got to apply it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all right. So going back to the timeline of what I bring from gig to gig, knowing the tunes. So the first time I ever got to play with these guys that were my heroes, I had done, so 85, 86, 86, I started doing a lot of weddings. I was playing a lot. I was playing the tunes a lot. I was playing with good wedding band musicians. One day I get a chance to sub with my favorite guys, Ornell Dupree, Richard T, Chris Parker, Lou Marini was on sax.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know me. Somehow, it's a little light, whatever. I get called to go in. I knew all the tunes. I
Right.
loved the band. I knew the tunes. I mean, what other God, I was listening to a podcast with somebody the other day. It was another situation where I knew the tunes. I forgot what it was, but it was another where a guy came in with a well-known band and he got the gig because he knew the tunes. He loved the tunes.
Right.
So I got the gig. They had a lot of guys. See, that band was used to hiring, the studio guys like Will Lee, or who else was available on that level. Well, those guys don't know a lot of tunes.
Right.
I'm not going to speak for anyone individual, but there's a lot of studio musicians who are great, and they don't know a lot of tunes because they just record a tune and they move on.
Yeah,
And
that's
they've never been or hadn't been since, you know, they were teenagers in the bar band situation.
mm,
They're just doing right, you know, reading, playing, reading, playing. So when they got a sub came in, and I remember I watched the guy, I could tell you off camera who it was. Uh, uh, I remember I watched them and I went, oh, you know, that guy is great, but he doesn't really know the music. That's when I gave them my card. And I got a call because that guy wasn't available. And he's an amazing bass player. Amazing. Didn't know the tunes,
right.
you know. So that was a big start of my career because I knew the tunes. So knowing the songs, you know, so make sure if there's songs that you love, you know them because
Sure.
one day you might be able to call, like you maybe be in a Steely Dan cover band. Like I've never played in a Steely Dan cover band, but I practice a lot of Steely Dan songs because if
Okay.
I'm ever in a chance to play in a cover band, I want to keep the gig because I love them.
Yeah.
Right?
That's not
So,
one. That's not one that I would be that. I like Steely Dan. I don't love Steely Dan. So that like I understand what you're saying. That doesn't motivate me enough
right.
to shed the tunes to get them like gig ready. You know, if I was
I
just
don't
learning
have
a book to get gig ready, this is actually I'll edit this out actually, but the act I'm working on, not to get the gig, but to be on standby for, is Tower of Power.
Right. There you go.
So like
Yeah.
the drummer, I teach at
Right.
I work at LACM, the music college,
Right.
and I was in this R&B class, and the drummer just got done doing a tour with him, Herman Matthews,
Is
who
that
did
Herman?
yeah.
Herman? Yeah.
So
I saw them with.
so I get to class one day, and Herman and I were outside. I'm like, dude, I'm gonna tell you right now, I want the Tower gig, man, and I don't want the gig. I want to be the phone call. Any shit goes down, the guy can't make
Right.
it. The guy, whatever happens, I already know the book. I want to be that
Right.
guy. And worst thing that could happen is nothing. I get to
Right.
learn that music to that degree. It's going to help my
Right.
technique. It's going to help all the things. I'll write it out. I'll put the transcriptions on the site. You know, I'm a phone call away. Just let me know. Give me the set list. And just like, it's the backup quarterback approach, which is sometime that guy's going to break his ankle or something, and you need to go in there. You need to know the playbook. You need to know the timing. As soon as you can, and it can be seamless, done.
That's brilliant. I mean, that's the thing to do. You know, play what inspires you. I love that stuff too. They have so many songs. They
I
have
know.
a lot of songs.
I know. That's why just give me the set list, because I can't go through like 30 years of records and learn every version of
Right.
of what they
You
got
know what,
going now.
the one that turned me on first was the Urban Renewal record.
Oh, I don't have
The
that
third
one actually.
record.
I'll have to
That's
check on that.
okay. Well, then you'll fall in love all over again.
Okay, great.
There's some great songs on that, and that was a record. And what confounded me about that record that was one where Garibaldi did maybe one or two cuts, and there's another drummer on all the other songs, and that was the only record he played on, and it's great. And I don't know any information about this guy.
Who was the other guy?
I don't remember his name, but it was a name I never heard before or after.
Huh.
But it's great.
Huh.
Check it out. Urban Renewal. I think it was their
Okay.
third or fourth record. Came out like 73 or something like that.
Okay.
But Rocco is just, and there's some ballads on, I mean.
Yeah, they always have
the way
like the
that he-
slam and dance tunes, and then they always have the slow jam ballads.
Right. Well, I mean, that was almost more amazing is the way that he fit his style into the ballads,
Sure.
like conceptual.
Right.
Right. So, that, you can't say enough about that.
No,
Can't say
that's but that to go back to what you were talking about, that's a book that
Right.
would inspire me enough to want to do it just to do it. And then if I could work it into my career somehow, that'd be cool. But if not, it's a great incentive to spend that much time with the music.
Yeah, Yeah, yeah,
nothing bad comes from it.
exactly.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it's any time you put into playing something, nothing bad is going to come other than you. Oh, one thing that's hard is that you want to make sure you're doing the most you can given the time you're allotted. Like,
that's
we
right. Yeah,
only have a certain amount of time in our lives to spend practicing. So,
yeah,
we want to make sure that we're using it as well as we can.
yeah.
Um,
That's true.
so, so to your two questions, what I bring, the second question, what I bring, uh, and it's sort of, again, it was like I sort of just went to where I was wanted and then tried to do the best in that situation. And of course, the older you get, and as you know, things you're going to start getting more and more calls that are in your wheelhouse,
Sure.
right? And then it gets to the other side of that, which is we talked is the getting pigeonholed wheelhouse, right?
Yes,
Where
yes,
you're
yes.
getting too many calls for like one small thing that you do.
Right, right, right.
And and that uh, uh that's again to be dealt with. And you got to be proactive about, doing things that, getting work that you just haven't been doing too much of lately.
Sure.
But um So, yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's been very basic skills, just playing with a good groove and showing up with a good sound, and it might be a sound that I like that maybe not everybody likes or whatever, like as far as bass players are concerned, like I, when to show up without a P bass. Like when is the P bass with flats not going to be doing the job? That's like one of the, right? It's like you want to sound contemporary sometimes. You want to slap a little bit
Sure.
you know, and like, but if it's someone that I don't know and it's any kind of popular music job, the first time I show up, it'll be with a P bass with flats. And I've never been one for like bringing more than one bass to a gig because that even jars me too much. I mean, if it's a show, it's a completely different
Right,
animal.
right.
I mean, there are shows where, I mean, on Hamilton, there's 4 or 5 different basses. Like, there'll be time, on Hamilton, I think
Did
you
you
got to
play
play.
key bass on Hamilton? Because when I saw it at
I have
Pantages,
not subbed that show. I
okay.
I was down in the pit and given all the materials. I just it never worked out that I was in town when they needed somebody.
Here in
But
LA or in New York?
in New York,
Okay.
the key the key. I will say this, uh, even as a professional bassist, the keyboard parts are much easier than many of the bass parts.
Hmm.
I mean, it's boom, 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 boom,
Yeah, yeah.
boom. It's really simple stuff. You don't have to think about tone. There's nothing
Right.
technical. You don't even have to think about dynamics. Uh,
Yeah.
it's very simple. You don't
Yeah.
think about bowing technique or anything. I
Right, right,
did
right, right.
hear it. I did hear it here. One thing I did during the pandemic, I thought, well, why don't I really get Hamilton under my fingers because I like it. It's
I like the
fun
show. Yeah.
way, and I know enough people involved that maybe I'll get called for a tour. At that time, I was still maybe into taking a tour, and I noticed it was playing here in LA, and I went to see it at the Pantages, and I didn't know the bass player. I knew maybe I don't know a lot of those guys here, but I did know the drummer, and
Who's the drummer?
I was just in the audience. He didn't even know I was there, and a lot of times when you go see a show, the sound isn't good enough for you to really hear how good a player is. I mean, you
Hmm.
just sort of hear vaguely. You hear the part, but you don't hear the subtleties, especially on bass. And in the beginning of the second act, there's a swing tune. Have you looked at that book?
I've never looked at it. I saw the
Yeah,
show, and it was
yeah,
Michael Valerio on bass when I saw it.
right.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of the second act, it was a swing tune, and I hear maybe 8 bars of the swing thing sticking out, and it's amazing. Like the guy is just grabbing some groove, and I'm like, that sounds incredible. What is that? It was really great. Who is this bass? I didn't know who Michael Valerio was.
Okay.
And that I go, and I'm thinking maybe I could sub on it.
Yeah.
So I go, Google this guy. Soloed with the New York Phil, soloist with the LA Phil, on down. Okay, I friended. He didn't even friend me back on Facebook or whatever. Like 'cause I'm not gonna be able to. I mean, I just don't think that I'd be good enough. I just
Valerio is a sweetheart. So I would suggest don't take it personally. Whatever interactions did or did not happen, he's a sweetheart.
I'm sure.
I've known him for a little while. We did an interview that was in Bass Magazine together, and we text back and forth here and there, checking in.
Yeah. No, I know that. I mean, I know what the other guys. I don't have to say his name. The big studio bass players that are a friend of Oz's that I texted or whatever email when I was here. He never got back to me. But yeah, I mean, because they're the guys that get emails from every bass player that moves to LA to think that they can play at all. So not I would never. I don't think I've ever been that busy that I had to go somebody like that, but God willing, one day maybe I will. But yeah, he was great. I mean, I would have loved to hear his whole show, but man, and I don't even know if he's really known as like a jazz guy, but man, that sounds
Valerio,
so good.
He's principal on all the film dates.
Yeah. I mean, so he could do.
He's a jazz guy, but he's also like a ridiculous classical guy and reader and industry guy.
Yeah. Yes, I learned that from figuring out. So I'm not moving to I moved to LA. I'm not calling the top guys and saying you can rely on me for anything. I'm not there. I can cover a lot of things. But I can't do like what Neil Steubenhouse does. Like, look at it and get it on take one, whatever it is.
Yeah.
No, I'd like to. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Frank, this has been great. This has been great, man.
Okay.
Thanks for taking the time.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, man. We'll
be
in touch for sure. All right. Thanks, Frank.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yo, this is Craig Gash. Subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on the Instagram, the YouTube. Leave us a comment.
All right. That was my talk with Frank Canino. Frank, thanks for being on the podcast, man. And anytime, come back on. It was wonderful. It was wonderful to meet him at the Jerry Jamont Masterclass. It was wonderful to hang with him there and have him on the show. Again, check out the show notes below. It has a link to his website. Read more about him, Frank Canino. All right, folks. That's about all I got for this one. That about wraps it up. I will catch you on the next one in a minute.